He just wanted to pay the rent, to keep a roof over his daughter's head. Even if it meant selling the one thing his father left him, a vintage timepiece that held more memories than minutes. He never expected the woman behind the counter would to be a reclusive billionaire who wasn't just interested in the watch, she was interested in buying his time. Instead, before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from the afternoon? Light slanted low through the grimy window of the workshop, casting long shadows that made the space feel even smaller than it was. Leo sat hunched over his workbench, a tiny magnifying loupe pressed to his eye. The delicate guts of a pocket watch lay scattered before him, a constellation of brass gears and ruby bearings that no longer ticked. He moved with a surgeon's focus, his hands steady, despite the tremor in his chest. The scent of cleaning solution and old metal hung in the praisen air, a perfume he'd once found. Comforting. Now, it just smelled like the past, a past that couldn't pay this month's bills. The eviction notice was tucked under his blotter, its sharp corners, a constant reminder of the deadline looming. Just 3 days away. He'd tried everything. Sold his old tools, taken on rush jobs that paid too little and cost too much sleep. But it wasn't enough. The world had moved on from handcrafted repairs. It wanted smartwatches and disposable things. Things he couldn't fix. With his hands he set the loupe down and rubbed his eyes. The fatigue was a heavy coat. He couldn't take off from the small adjoining room where they lived. He could hear his daughter Maya humming a tune she'd made, up a bright thread of sound in the dusty quiet. She was 8 years old, and her world was still built on the solid foundation of his love. She didn't know the ground was cracking beneath them. She didn't know he'd been watering down the pied soup, or that the cough in their old car was getting worse. He stood and walked to the small wooden box on the shelf beside his father's portrait. His father had been a watchmaker too, the one who taught him that every timepiece had a soul, a story, a rhythm all its own. He opened the box slowly. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was his father's watch. A 1950s chronograph with a silver face and elegant blue hands. It was the only valuable thing he had left, not just in money but in memory. Could still feel the weight of it in his palm, the day his father gave it to him a week before he passed. "Time is the only thing we can't make more of, son," he'd said. "So, spend it on what matters." Selling it felt like a betrayal, like he was pawning the very soul of his inheritance. But Maya's humming continued, a steady, hopeful rhythm. And he knew what mattered most. He closed the box with a quiet click. His decision made, he would take it to the one place in the city that might understand its worth. A high-end vintage shop downtown. A place he'd only ever stared at through the window, a world he didn't belong in, but one he had to enter for her. As he stepped out of the workshop into the dim hallway, the light from Maya's room spilled out a warm yellow rectangle on the floor she sat on. Her bed, a coloring book, open in her lap, crayons scattered around her like fallen petals. She looked up and beamed a gap-toothed smile that could have powered the whole city. "Are you done working, Daddy?" He nodded, forcing a lightness into his voice that felt foreign. "All done for today, sweetheart. How about we go for a walk downtown?" Her eyes lit up. "The fancy part." "The fancy part," he confirmed, tucking the watchbox into the inner pocket of his worn leather jacket. It felt heavy, like a stone against his ribs. He took her hand, her small fingers wrapping around his, with complete trust. And as they stepped out into the crisp autumn air, Leo told himself, this wasn't an ending. It was a sacrifice, a desperate bid to buy them just a little more time. The shop was called The Gilded Hour, its name etched in subtle gold script on a window of polished glass. It was tucked between an art gallery and a bespoke tailor on a street where the ragin' cars were silent, and the shoes of passers-by made no sound on the pavement. Leo paused at the entrance, his reflection staring back at him, a tired man in a faded jacket holding a little girl's hand. Maya pressed her face against the glass, eyes wide with wonder. The inside was nothing like he'd imagined. Not a store, but a sanctuary. Soft light glowed from hidden fixtures, illuminating glass cases that held not just watches, but stories. A silver compass from a forgotten expedition. A string of pearls that had once graced the neck of an actress. A collection of fountain pens that had surely signed treaties or love letters. It was a museum of quiet elegance. A place that felt more like a library of beautiful things than a shop. A soft chime sounded as he pushed the door open. The air inside was still and warm, scented with something like old books and beeswax. Behind a long mahogany counter, a woman stood, arranging a collection of enameled lockets. She looked up. As they entered, her expression unreadable. She was younger than he'd expected. Maybe in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back into a simple knot, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. She wore a simple black dress. No jewelry, no name tag, no forced retail smile. She just watched them with a quiet, observant stillness. That felt both unnerving and calming. Leo's hand tightened around Maya's. He felt suddenly out of place, his worn boots scuffing the pristine wooden floor. The weight of the watch in his pocket felt heavier, now more conspicuous. "Can I help you?" Her voice was low and steady, not unfriendly, but not effusive either. It was the voice of someone who didn't need to sell anything. Leo cleared his throat. I have something I was hoping to sell," he said the words, feeling clumsy. In the quiet room, she nodded toward the counter, her gaze never wavering. He stepped forward, gently guiding Maya beside him. He took out the box and placed it on the polished wood. The soft thud of it landing felt deafening. He opened it. The silver face of the watch caught the light shimmering against the worn velvet. Maya gasped softly. "Daddy's grandpa watch," she whispered. Leo placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, quieting her. The woman leaned forward, her eyes not on the watch itself, but on his hands, on the way he touched the box, with a reverence that spoke of more than ownership. She didn't reach for it. She just looked at him and waited. Her silence was an invitation, a question, a space for him to fill with his story. And for the first time that day, Leo felt like someone might actually be listening. The woman's name was Clara. She didn't offer it, and he didn't ask. Her eyes were what he noticed first. They weren't just looking at the watch, they were reading it, reading him. She saw the faint tremor in his hand as he pushed the box forward, the way his daughter Maya stood on her tiptoes to peer over the counter. Her breath fogging the glass in a small, hopeful circle. Clara had seen men like him before, men with pride in their shoulders and desperation in their eyes. They came in with their grandmother's rings, their father's medals, their own wedding bands, all carrying stories they were being forced to trade for cash. But this was different. There was a stillness in him, a quiet dignity that refused to break even as it was bending. She finally reached out, her fingers long and graceful, brushing against the edge of the velvet box. She didn't pick up the watch. Instead, she gestured to the worn strap. "He wore it every day," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Leo blinked, surprised. "Yeah, every day. He was a watchmaker too. He said it was his best work." A sad smile touched his lips. "He used to say it had a stronger heartbeat than he did." Clara looked from the watch to the little girl beside him, who was now staring at her with wide, curious eyes. Then she looked back at Leo and saw the whole story etched in the lines. Around his eyes, the eviction notice, the empty pantry, the love that was willing to sacrifice a legacy for a future. "It's a beautiful piece," she said, her voice soft. "The movement is a Valjoux 72. They're rare. In this condition," she knew its mechanics, its value, its history. But that wasn't what she was seeing. What she saw was a father's heart on a mahogany counter, masquerading as a timepiece. She could buy it outright, give him a fair price, and send him on his way. It would be easy, clean, a simple transaction. But that's what her old life had been, full of simple transactions that left her feeling empty. She pushed the box gently back toward him. "I can't just buy this," she said. Leo's face fell his carefully. Constructed composure starting to crumble. "It's not for sale." "I don't understand," he said, voice tight. Clara leaned forward, her expression earnest. "A piece like this, it deserves more than a quick sale. It needs to be properly appraised. Cleaned, documented. It's a process. It takes time." Leo shook his head. "I don't have time," he said the truth of it. Raw and exposed, Clara held his gaze unwavering. "I know," she said softly, "which is why I'd like to offer you an advance on consignment, a deposit while I do the work." She named a number, a figure that made Leo's breath catch in his throat. It was more than enough. It was a lifeline. "But that's," he started, "that's what it's worth to me to make sure this is done." "Right?" she said, cutting him off gently. "And while I have it, I happen to have a collection of antique clocks in the back that need a delicate hand. I can't find a technician in the city with the right touch, judging by your father's work. You have it. I'll pay you for your time, of course." She paused, letting the offer settle in the quiet air. "Consider it a trial. Run away for us to see if we work well together." It wasn't charity, not exactly. It was an offer of work, of dignity, of time. He stared at her. This woman with storm-gray eyes and a quiet strength, trying to understand her, angle her. Motive. But he found none. Just a steady gaze that saw more than he was showing, and offered more than he had dared to ask for. Maya tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, can we?" she whispered. Leo looked down at his daughter's hopeful face, then back at the woman who was offering him a way out that didn't require him to lose his soul in the process. "Okay," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do it." The contract wasn't a contract at all. It was a simple, one-page agreement written in elegant cursive on the shop's letterhead. It detailed the consignment of the watch and the terms of his temporary employment as a horological consultant, a title so grand it made Leo want to laugh. It felt like something out of a dream, a story he might tell Maya one day about a mysterious benefactor in a gilded shop. He signed his name on the line, provided his hand still not quite steady. The relief that washed over him was so profound it left him dizzy. He hadn't just saved their apartment. He had saved a piece of himself, the part that knew how to build and fix and create. Clara filed the paper away in a heavy wooden desk behind the counter. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate. She didn't treat the moment like a victory or a transaction, but like the beginning of something. She slid an envelope across the counter. "Your advance," she said, "and a key to the workshop entrance in the back. You can start tomorrow if you'd like. The clocks are waiting." Leo took the envelope, his fingers brushing hers for a brief second. Her skin was cool and smooth, a stark contrast to his calloused hands. "Thank you," he said. The words felt inadequate for the weight of what she had just done. "You're helping me," she replied simply. "A good technician is harder to find than a flawless diamond." As they turned to leave, Maya paused and looked back at Clara. "Are you a queen?" she asked, her voice full of genuine curiosity. Clara blinked. Taken aback, a soft smile touched her lips. "No, sweetheart, not a queen." "Oh," Maya said, tilting her head. "You just look like one." With that they were gone. The chime of the door, a soft echo in the sudden silence. Clara stood at the dining counter for a long time, staring. At the space where the man and his daughter had been, she walked over to the glass display case and looked down at the watch he had left behind. Its silver face seemed to glow in the soft light. She didn't need to appraise it. She knew its value to the dollar, but it's real, worth the weight of a father's love, a daughter's future. That was immeasurable. She picked it up gently, its cool metal resting in her palm. She hadn't lied. She did have clocks in the back, a dusty collection she'd acquired at an estate sale months ago and had forgotten about, but she hadn't needed them fixed, not until now, not until a man with tired eyes and a watchmaker's hands walked in and reminded her that some things were worth more than their price tag. They were worth the time it took to save them. The next morning, Leo woke before the sun. The air in the small apartment felt different, lighter. The oppressive weight of the eviction notice had lifted, replaced by a fragile but persistent sense of hope. He made pancakes for Maya, real ones with the last of the maple syrup, and she ate them with a joy that felt like a reward. He walked her to school, his steps lighter on the pavement than they had been in months. Then he went to the shop. He let himself in through the back alley. Entrance as instructed, the key turning smoothly in the lock. The workshop was even more impressive than the storefront. It was a horologist's dream, a clean, well-lit space with organized rows of tools he'd only ever seen in catalogs. Vintage lathes, staking sets, a cabinet full of crystal glasses. Everything was immaculate. Everything was waiting. He ran a hand over the smooth surface of the workbench, a stark contrast to his own scarred and ink-stained desk. This was a world of precision, of quiet wealth, of things cared for and preserved. He felt a flicker of doubt, the familiar whisper that he didn't belong here, but then he saw them in the corner. Under a swath of velvet cloth stood a row of antique clocks, a grandfather clock with a painted moon dial, a French mantel clock with gilded cherubs, a small carriage clock with intricate enamel work. They were beautiful, but silent, their hands frozen their pendulums. Still, he uncovered the first one, a heavy German wall clock from the 19th century, and opened its back panel. The movement was a marvel of engineering, a forest of gears and springs choked with the dust of ages. He picked up a pair of tweezers, his hands instantly steady. This he understood. This was a language he spoke fluently for hours. He worked lost in the rhythmic process of disassembly, cleaning, and diagnosis. He forgot about the rent, the bills, the ache in his shoulders. He was just a craftsman, again. A man in his element, surrounded by the gentle ghosts of time and the quiet promise of a new beginning. He didn't hear her enter the workshop. She moved, with a quiet grace that didn't disturb the dust motes, dancing in the light. He only knew she was there when she spoke his name. Leo. He looked up, startled. His loupe still pressed to his eye. Clara stood a few feet away, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She was dressed simply again, a dark gray sweater and slacks, but she carried an air of quiet authority that seemed woven into her very presence. "I brought a peace offering," she said, placing a cup on the edge of his workbench, "in case the clocks are putting up a fight." He removed the loupe and smiled faintly. "They're not fighting. They're just telling a bride. Long story." She nodded, watching him work. "What's it saying?" "This one," he gestured to the disassembled movement, "says it's been neglected for a long time, but it hasn't forgotten how to run. It just needs someone to listen." Clara's gaze softened. She looked around the workshop at the scattered parts, the organized chaos he had already created on his bench. "You belong here," she said. It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation, spoken with a certainty that caught him off guard. He looked down at his hands, stained with oil and grime. "I don't know about that." "I do," she replied. Her eyes met his over the steam of the coffee. "I've had a dozen so-called experts in here. They saw these clocks as antiques, as investments. They never once talked about them like they were alive." Leo didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. Not for the part of him that was quiet and patient and lived in the spaces between ticks and tocks. He took a sip of the coffee. It was rich and dark and tasted nothing like the instant coffee he made at home. She stayed for a while, not hovering, but sitting on a stool in the corner, watching him work in a comfortable silence. They didn't talk about their lives or their pasts. They talked about escapements and hairsprings, and the different ways that time could be measured. But as the afternoon wore on, Leo realized they weren't just talking about clocks. They were talking about themselves, broken things that just needed someone to listen. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm, a quiet melody of purpose and peace. Leo would drop Maya at school, then spend his days in the gilded silence of the workshop. He lost himself in the work. Each clock, a new puzzle, a new story to uncover. He coaxed life back into mechanisms that had been still for decades. The gentle ticking that slowly filled the room was the sound of his own heart, settling into a steadier beat. Clara would appear in the late morning with coffee sometimes, with pastries from a bakery down the street. She never stayed for long at first, just a few minutes to check on his progress, but her visits grew longer, the silences between them more comfortable. He learned things about her in small fragments, that she preferred her coffee black, that she loved the smell of old paper, that she could identify the origin of a piece of silver by the tarnish alone. She never talked about her family or where she came from. And he never asked. It felt like an unspoken agreement. They were two people existing in the present, a space they had both created away from the weight of their respective pasts. One afternoon, Maya came to the shop. After school, she was in awe of the workshop, her eyes wide as she traced the patterns on a clock face with her small finger. She sat quietly at a small stool. Clara had brought in for her drawing pictures, while Leo worked. Clara watched her with a soft smile, a look of unguarded tenderness that Leo hadn't seen on her face before. "She has your focus," Clara said quietly. Leo looked over from his workbench and saw Maya concentrating on her drawing, her tongue poking out from the corner of her mouth, just as his did when he was deep in thought. "She has her mother's heart, though," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Clara's smile faded slightly. "What was she like?" He paused, the screwdriver in his hand hovering over a tiny screw. "She was like a sunrise," he said softly, "the kind that makes you feel like the whole world is new." He hadn't spoken about his wife to anyone in years, but with Clara, the words came easily. Without the usual sting of grief, Clara didn't offer empty platitudes or pity. She just listened, her presence, a quiet anchor in the dusty workshop. He looked at her, then, this woman who had appeared in his life like a ghost, and had somehow become the most solid thing in it. And he realized with a jolt that he didn't want her to leave. He wasn't just grateful for the work, he was grateful for her, for the way she saw him, not as a man with nothing, but as a man with something worth saving. The first clock chimed on a Thursday afternoon, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the quiet shop like a long-held breath being released. Leo stood back from the towering grandfather clock, a small smile of satisfaction on his face. He'd spent 3 days coaxing its soul back to life, and the sound of its heartbeat was a victory. Clara emerged from the front of the store, drawn by the sound. Her eyes lit up as she saw the pendulum swinging in a steady, graceful arc. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with genuine wonder. "It told me what it needed," he replied, wiping his hands on a rag. She walked closer, her fingers tracing the polished wood of the clock's case. "It hasn't made a sound in 50 years. My grandfather used to say it was the heart of the house." Leo's smile faltered. "Your grandfather," she nodded, her gaze distant. "This shop, it was his. He started it. After he retired, he loved things with stories, things that had lived a life before they got here." She turned to him, her expression softening. "He would have liked you. He understood the patience it takes to listen to something broken." It was the most she had ever shared about her past, and the small revelation felt like a gift. Leo found himself wanting to know more about the grandfather who loved old things, about the woman who had inherited his legacy. He was about to ask when Maya burst in from the back room where she'd been reading. "Daddy, it's snowing," she announced, pressing her face against the window. Tiny flakes were beginning to drift down from a gray sky, melting as they hit the pavement. "It's the first snow," she said, her voice full of awe. Clara came to stand beside her, looking out at the street. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Leo watched them both, the woman with a past shrouded in secrets, and the little girl who was his entire future, standing together, watching the first snow fall on a world that suddenly felt bigger and more hopeful than it had in a very long time. He felt a shift in the air, a subtle change in the searcher atmosphere of the workshop. It wasn't just about clocks and repairs anymore, it was about the quiet moments of connection that were starting to feel more significant than any ticking mechanism, and that scared him more than any eviction. Notice, ever. Had the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in a soft white hush by late afternoon, the streets were quiet, the world outside muffled and slow. Maya was thrilled. She spent the day running between the workshop window and her coloring book, narrating the storm to a captive audience of silent clocks. Leo tried to work, but his focus was fractured. His thoughts kept drifting to Clara, who had disappeared into the front of the shop hours ago, but whose presence still lingered like a faint perfume. He was tightening a screw on a delicate carriage clock when he heard the soft click of her footsteps. She stood in the doorway, holding a large flat box tied with a simple black ribbon. "I was going to wait," she said, "but the snow felt right." She placed the box on his workbench and slid it toward him. "What's this?" he asked, looking from the box to her face. "Open it." Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were two cashmere sweaters, one a deep charcoal gray, and the other a soft heather blue. A small handwritten note lay on top. It read, "For the watchmaker and his daughter, winter is here." Leo stared at them, speechless. The fabric was impossibly soft, the kind of luxury he had only ever seen. Through shop windows, he looked up at Clara, his pride, a familiar knot in his throat. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Because it's too much, because we had a deal. I fix your clocks. You pay me." "This wasn't part of the deal, Leo," she said, stepping closer. "It's a gift, not a transaction. You and Maya have given me more than you know. You've brought this place back to life." Her eyes were earnest, her sincerity undeniable. But he couldn't shake the feeling of being indebted, of being a project she was trying to fix. "I'm not a charity case, Clara," he said, his voice low and tight. She flinched as if he'd struck her. "I have never once thought of you that way." "Then, what is this?" He gestured to the plate box. "Is this what you do? You find broken people and fix them with expensive things?" The words were out before he could stop them, sharper and more bitter than he intended. The warmth in the room turned cold. The silence that fell between them was no longer comfortable. It was a chasm. Clara's expression hardened, her soft edges turning to steel. "You're wrong," she said, her voice clipped and quiet. "And if you think my kindness is a currency, then you understand me less than I thought." She turned and walked out of the workshop without another word, leaving Leo alone with the ticking clocks, the falling snow, and the heavy weight of a gift he had been too proud to accept. The workshop felt cold and empty after Clara left. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. The clocks ticked on a steady metronome, marking the time since he had pushed her away. Leo sank onto his stool, staring at the open box on his workbench. The cashmere sweaters felt like a rebuke, a testament to a kindness he had mistaken for pity. He ran a hand through his hair, the anger and pride that had flared up moments ago, now collapsing into a familiar dull ache of regret. He had spent so long building walls to protect himself and Maya that he had forgotten how to accept a hand reached out in friendship. He had seen her gesture through the distorted lens of his own insecurities, and in doing so he had hurt her. Maya came in, A few minutes later, her face scrunched with worry. "Is Miss Clara mad at you, Daddy?" she asked her voice. Small, he looked at his daughter, and the truth was unavoidable. "No, sweetheart," he said, his voice hoarse. "I was mad at me, and I took it out on her." Maya came and stood beside him, her small hand resting on his arm. "Mommy used to say sorry is a magic word." He looked down at the sweater. Then at his daughter's trusting face. She was right. He had been so focused on not being a burden that he had rejected the one person who hadn't treated him like one. He had to fix this. He carefully folded the sweaters back into the box, picked it up, and walked to the front of the store. Clara was standing by the window, staring out at the snow-covered street. Her back to him, her posture was rigid, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. He stopped a few feet behind her, the floorboards creaking softly under his boots. "Clara," he said. She didn't turn. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling both small and immense. "You were right. I was wrong. I've spent so long fighting to stand on my own that I forgot what it feels like to have someone stand with me. I saw a price tag, not a gift, and that was my mistake, not yours." She was silent for a long moment. Then she turned slowly. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear, her expression no longer angry, just sad. "I didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable, Leo," she said. "I just wanted to do something nice." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "And I'm grateful. More than you know." He held out the box. "Maya and I would be honored to accept your gift." A small smile touched her lips. A fragile truce in the quiet room. "Good," she said softly. "Because the blue one will match your eyes." The tension between them eased not, disappearing entirely but softening into something more manageable. The first snow had become a symbol, not of conflict, but of a hard-won understanding, and as they stood there in the quiet shop surrounded by the ghosts of time, Leo felt a warmth that had nothing to do with cashmere. It was the warmth of a second chance. The apology hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge over the chasm he had created. Leo didn't leave right away. He lingered near the counter while Clara busied herself polishing a silver locket, a task he suspected was more for her hands than for the locket itself. The snow fell thicker outside a curtain of white that seemed to insulate them from the rest of the world. "I get it, you." "No," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "Why, you're careful." Clara looked up from her work, her stormy eyes searching his. "What do you mean?" "You build walls too," he said. "Yours are just made of more expensive materials." She set the locket down, her expression unreadable. "Is that what you think I do?" "I think," he said, choosing his words with care, "that you've been hurt before. You don't trust people easily. You keep a distance, not because you're cold, but because you're afraid of what will happen if you let them get too close." Her mask of composure slipped for a fraction of a second, a flicker of vulnerability that was gone. As quickly as it appeared, she looked away, her gaze settling on the watch he had brought in, still sitting in its open box on a velvet tray. "My father built an empire," she said, her voice low and distant. "Not a family. He taught me that trust was a liability, and that everyone has an agenda. I spent years proving him wrong or trying to, until I learned he was right." The bitterness in her voice was a raw, open wound. "So yes," she said, meeting his gaze again. "I build walls, Leo, because I've seen what happens when they come down." He didn't. I know the details of her story. But he understood the shape of it, the loneliness, the betrayal, the quiet ache of a heart that had learned to protect itself by staying closed. He stepped closer, his boots silent on the old wood floor. "Then we have that in common," he said softly. "But walls don't just keep people out, Clara. They keep you in." She didn't answer, but he saw the truth of his words land in her eyes. He reached out and gently touched her hand where it rested on the counter, his calloused fingers a stark contrast to her smooth skin. "You're not alone in this," he whispered, and for the first time she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, and her fingers curled around his, a silent acknowledgement, a shared moment of surrender in the heart of the gilded hour. The next morning, a sleek black car with tinted windows pulled up in front of the shop. It sat idling at the curb like a panther in the snow. A man in a dark tailored suit stepped out and entered the store without a wand. Sound Leo was in the workshop, but he heard the sharp click of the man's shoes on the hardwood floor and the low murmur of his voice. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clipped. Demanding Clara's voice was a low, steady response, but Leo could hear the tension in it. A few minutes later, the man left, and the car sped away, leaving a cloud of exhaust in the quiet street. Clara appeared in the workshop doorway. A few moments later, her face was pale, her hands clenched at her sides. "Everything okay?" Leo asked, setting down his tools. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just business," she said vaguely. But Leo knew it was more than that. He saw the shadow in her eyes, the one that appeared whenever the outside world encroached on their quiet sanctuary. He didn't press her, but the incident left a sense of unease in the air, a reminder that Clara's life extended far beyond the walls of this shop, a life she was deliberately keeping him from later that day. He found a discarded financial newspaper in the trash bin behind the shop. He almost ignored it, but a headline caught his eye. "Ashworth Industries CEO remains elusive after hostile takeover bid." Beside the article was a small, grainy photo of a woman with dark hair and a familiar steely gaze. Clara Ashworth. He stared at the name, the title, the story of a corporate battle, a family dynasty, and a reclusive heiress who had walked away from it all. It all clicked into place. The expensive shop, the cashmere sweaters, the quiet sadness in her eyes. She wasn't just a shop owner, she was a titan of industry. Hiding in plain sight, he felt a cold knot form in his stomach. It wasn't anger. It was a profound sense of distance. The chasm between their worlds was not just wide, it was a canyon, and he was standing on the wrong side of it. He folded the newspaper and tucked it into his jacket pocket, the weight of it far heavier than his father's watch had ever been. He now understood her walls, but he also understood that he would never be able to scale them. He was a watchmaker, a man who fixed broken things. But this was a world he couldn't even begin to comprehend, let alone fix. The air in the workshop felt heavy with unspoken truths. When Leo returned the next day, he had spent the night staring at the ceiling. The newspaper article, a lead weight in his gut. Clara was already there, standing by the window with a cup of tea, her back to him. He knew she could feel his presence, but she didn't turn around. He walked to his workbench and set down his tools, the familiar click and clatter sounding foreign in the tense silence. "Clara," he said finally, his voice steady despite the storm inside her. She turned slowly. Her eyes were guarded, prepared. "I know," he said, simply holding up the folded newspaper. She didn't flinch. Her expression was a carefully crafted mask of neutrality. "I see," she said, her voice quiet. "So now you know." "I know your name," he corrected. "I don't think I know you at all." The mask cracked, a flicker of hurt passing through her eyes. "That's not fair, Leo." "Is it?" "Not." He stepped forward, his own hurt rising to the tutored www surface. "You talk about walls, but you failed to mention yours are holding up a skyscraper. I fix clocks, Clara. I live in a 2-room apartment above my shop, and I was about to be evicted. You're not just in a different world. You're on a different planet." "My money doesn't define me," she said, her voice rising with a passion he hadn't heard before. "It's the one thing I have spent my entire life trying to escape." "It seems to be doing a pretty good job of finding you," he shot back, gesturing vaguely toward the street where the black car had been parked. She took a sharp breath, as if he'd slapped her. I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you the parts of my life. I hate the parts that have nothing to do with who I am in here with you. Don't you see? He said, his voice pleading now. It has everything to do with it. You hired me to fix your clocks, but was I just another broken thing? You thought you could fix a project, a diversion from your real life. No, she whispered the word, a raw wound. You were the only real thing. But he couldn't hear it. Not now. Not through the roaring in his ears. The chasm between them had opened up, and he didn't know how. To cross it, he turned away, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I can't do this, Clara. I can't pretend to be in your world, and you can't keep hiding in mine. It's not fair to you, it's not fair to Maya, and it's not fair to me. He picked up his jacket, the watch he had brought in for repair, sitting half-finished on his bench. I think it's best if I finish the clocks and then we go our separate ways. He didn't look at her as he walked out. He couldn't bear to see the look in her eyes, the one that would confirm he had just broken, the one good thing that had happened to him in years. The silence that followed Leo's departure was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Clara stood motionless in the center of the workshop. The ticking of the clocks, a mocking reminder of the time that was now stretching between them, empty and cold. She sank onto the stool. He had just vacated her hand, resting on the half-finished watch he had left behind its delicate gears. Exposed and vulnerable, just like her heart, she had spent her life surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Her name, her money, her influence. Leo had wanted nothing but her time, her presence, her story, and she had been too afraid to give it to him. She had let her fear of being seen as Clara Ashworth rob her of the chance to be just Clara. She stayed there for hours as the light faded outside the workshop, growing dim and shadowy. She thought about her father, about the cold transactional world. He had built a world where love was a weakness and trust, a fool's game. She had run from that world, but she had brought its lessons with her. She had kept Leo at arm's length, not to protect him, but to protect herself. Meanwhile, Leo sat in his own quiet workshop, the one above his apartment, surrounded by his father's old tools and the familiar smell of oil and wood. He tried to work, but his hands were unsteady. His focus gone, he kept seeing her face. The hurt in her eyes when he had accused her of using him. He had been cruel, and he knew it. He had thrown her wealth in her face like an accusation, when all she had done was show him kindness. Maya came in and sat beside him, her head resting on his arm. "Are you sad because of Miss Clara?" she asked. He nodded, unable to speak. "I miss her," Maya said quietly. The shop is quieter without her laugh. The simple truth of his daughter's words cut through his pride and anger. She was right. The world was quieter and colder without Clara in it. He had been so afraid of the chasm between their worlds that he had dynamited the bridge himself. He had let his pride and his fear dictate his actions, and in doing so he had pushed away the one person who had seen him for who he was, not what he lacked. He looked at his father's watch, still on his wrist. He had almost sold it to buy them more time. And then Clara had come along and given him that time without asking for anything in return. He had been a fool, a proud, stubborn fool, and he had to fix it. He had to try the next morning. Leo walked into the gilded hour with a heavy heart and a clear purpose. The shop was empty. Clara was nowhere in sight. He walked through to the workshop. The space was clean and sterile. The tools he had used neatly, put away the clocks he had fixed, stood silent. Their pendulums still, she had stopped them all. A small note lay on his workbench in her elegant script. "The balance is paid in full. Thank you for your time." His stomach dropped. She was letting him go, closing the door he had opened. She was giving him what he thought he wanted an ending, but it wasn't what he wanted. Not anymore, he found. Her in the small office behind the workshop, a room he had never been in before. She was on the phone, her voice low and tense. No, I will not be attending the board meeting. Tell them my resignation stands." She hung up and looked up, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw him standing in the doorway. "Leo! You can't," he said, his voice hoarse. "You can't just stop the clocks." She stood, her expression guarded. "I'm just giving you what you asked for, an end to our arrangement." "That's not what I want," he said, stepping into the room. "I was a fool, Clara, a proud, scared fool. I let my own baggage cloud my judgment. I saw your name and your money, and I forgot to see you, the woman who brought me coffee, the woman who laughed with my daughter, who understood what it meant to be broken." She didn't speak, but her guarded expression softened. "I don't care about your money," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I don't care about your family's business or the articles in the paper. I care about you, Clara, and I was so afraid of losing you to your world that I pushed you away myself." He walked closer until he was standing right in front of her. "I don't want to go our separate ways. I want to find a way to build a bridge between our worlds together." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of relief. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, and he reached up, gently wiping. "Put it away." With his thumb. "Is it too late?" he whispered. She shook her head, her voice a choked whisper. "No, it's not too late." He leaned in and kissed her, then a soft, tentative kiss that was full of apologies and promises and the quiet hope of a new beginning. The clocks in the workshop may have been silent, but in the small office, a new time had begun to tick, a time for them together. They didn't solve everything with a single kiss. The chasm between their worlds was still there, wide and intimidating, but they had found the courage to stand at the edge of it together, and that was a start. The weeks that followed were a dance of cautious vulnerability and deliberate honesty. Clara didn't hide her life from him anymore. She told to him about the pressure from her family's company, the endless calls from the board, the weight of a legacy she never wanted. She showed him the angry emails, the threatening legal letters, the side of her life that was a constant battle. Leo, in turn, learned to let her in. He shared his fears about raising Maya alone, his quiet grief for his wife, the constant struggle of making ends meet. He let her see the cracks in his armor, the places where his pride was a poor substitute for help. They found their rhythm in the small moments. In the quiet sanctuary of the workshop, Clara would come in with lunch, not from a fancy restaurant but sandwiches she'd made herself. In her sterile apartment kitchen, they would eat, sitting on stools surrounded by the ticking of the clocks, a sound that was no longer a reminder of what they had to fix but a symbol of their steady progress. One afternoon she brought in a box of her grandfather's old tools, rusted and the ploss neglected. "I was going to sell them," she said, "but I thought maybe you could find a use for them." Leo took the box, his hands tracing the worn wooden handles. He understood the gesture. It wasn't about the tools, it was about her, trusting him with a piece of her past, a piece of her heart. He spent the next week restoring them, cleaning the rust, polishing the metal, sharpening the blades. He worked with a reverence that went beyond craftsmanship. It was an act of love, a way of showing her that he saw her, her history, her legacy, and he wasn't afraid of it, he was honoring it. Maya became the bridge between their two worlds. She moved effortlessly between the dusty charm of Leo's life and the quiet elegance of Clara's. She would sit in the workshop and draw pictures of clock-faced monsters, and then go with Clara to a quiet park where they would feed the ducks and talk about everything and nothing. Clara taught her how to identify different types of birds, and Maya taught Clara how to make a proper mud pie. It was in watching them together that Leo saw the future. Most clearly, a future where their two worlds didn't have to collide. They could coexist. They could merge, creating something new and stronger than either had been on its own. One evening, as they were closing up the shop, Clara turned to him, her expression serious. "The board is forcing my hand," she said. "They're calling a vote to have me removed." Officially, they think I've lost my mind. Have you? He asked, a small smile playing on his lips. She smiled back, completely, and it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. What are you going to do? He asked. She took his hand, her grip firm and sure. I'm going to let them, she said. Because my grandfather didn't build this shop to fund a corporate empire. He built it because he loved beautiful things that were a little bit broken. I think it's time I started doing the same. Her decision to walk away from Ashworth Industries for good sent shockwaves through the financial world. The headlines were brutal. Heiress abandons empire for antique shop. Clara Ashworth's spectacular fall from grace. They painted her as unstable, impulsive, a cautionary tale of a woman who had lost her way. Leo watched as she weathered the storm with a quiet strength that amazed him. She didn't read the articles, she didn't answer the calls, she just focused on the small world they were building together. Within the walls of the Gilded Hour, she used a portion of her personal fortune not to buy flashy things, but to invest in their future. She bought the building that housed Leo's workshop, an apartment, securing their home. She set up a trust for Maya, ensuring she would never have to worry about the things Leo had worried about. And she started a foundation in her grandfather's name to provide grants to artisans and craftspeople who, like Leo, were struggling to keep their traditions alive in a world that had forgotten their value. Leo, in turn, gave her something her money could never buy. A sense of belonging, a place where she was seen and loved for who she was, not what she was worth. He taught her the quiet joy of fixing something with her own hands, the satisfaction of bringing a silent thing back to life. She learned to laugh freely, without the fear of being judged. She learned that it was okay to be a little bit broken, because that's how the light gets in their life. Wasn't a fairy tale. It was a quiet collaboration, a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of what it meant to be saved, not by money or grand gestures, but by the steady, quiet presence of another human being. One evening they were in the workshop together, working side by side on a particularly stubborn French clock. Leo was explaining the intricacies of the escapement, his hands moving with practiced grace. Clara was listening intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. Maya was asleep in the small back room, curled up on a cot they had set up for her. You know, Clara said quietly, setting down a pair of tweezers, I've never been happier. Leo looked at her, the soft light of the prasting workbench illuminating the peace on her face. Me neither. He said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his father's watch, the one that had started it all. He had spent weeks restoring it. Its silver face gleamed, its blue hands ticking. In a steady, perfect rhythm, he held it out to her. I want you to have this, he said. It's a reminder of where we started. Clara took it, her eyes filling with tears. Leo, I can't. You can, he said, closing her fingers around it. It's not a payment, it's a promise. It's a symbol of the time you gave me, the time you gave us. She looked from the watch to his face, her heart full to bursting. I love you, Leo, she whispered. I love you too, Clara, he said. And in the quiet of the workshop, surrounded by the steady ticking of 100 clocks, they kissed a kiss that wasn't about beginnings or endings, but about the beautiful, messy, and perfect time they had found in between. The Gilded Hour thrived not because of its expensive inventory, but because of the heart within its walls. It became a place known for its unique blend of quiet elegance and warm authenticity. Clara's impeccable taste and knowledge of antiques drew in serious collectors, but it was Leo's skill and gentle nature that brought in the community. People would stop by not just for repairs, but for a cup of coffee and a quiet conversation. They brought him their broken treasures, their family heirlooms, their stories, and he listened to them all with the same patient care he gave to his clocks. He and Clara ran the shop together, a seamless partnership of two different worlds, merged into one. She handled the business side, the acquisitions, the clientele. He ran the Persis workshop, his hands always busy, bringing silent things back to life. They expanded the workshop, taking over the adjacent storefront, and turned it into a teaching space where Leo offered classes in watch and clock repair to a new generation of aspiring artisans. He found a deep joy in passing on his father's legacy, in keeping the craft alive. Maya grew up in the shop, her laughter, a constant melody against the backdrop of ticking clocks. She learned the names of gears and springs as easily as she learned her multiplication tables. She had her father's focus and her mother's heart, and a quiet wisdom that came from being raised by two people who had learned the hard way that the most valuable things in life are not things at all. They were a family, not a conventional one, but a family forged in the crucible of hardship and hope, a family built on the foundation of a second chance. One sunny afternoon, a man in a tailored suit walked into the shop, the same man from Ashworth Industries, who had come to deliver threats weeks before he looked around the bustling shop. His expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. He saw Clara behind the counter, laughing with a customer, her face free of the 21 tension he had always associated with her. He saw Leo in the workshop, patiently guiding a young student's hand. He saw Maya sitting at a small desk, meticulously organizing a tray of tiny screws. The man turned to leave, but Clara spotted him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. He shook his head, a look of grudging respect in his eyes. "No," he said. "It looks like you've already found everything you need." As he walked out, Clara caught Leo's eye across the room. He smiled at her, a look of such profound love and contentment that it took her breath away. She smiled back, her heart full. She had walked away from an empire, but she had gained a kingdom. A small, quiet kingdom filled with ticking clocks, a clust daughter's laughter, and the love of a man who had taught her that the best measure of time is not in minutes or hours but in moments of grace. The sun streamed through the workshop window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, like tiny golden stars. Leo sat at his workbench, his father's loupe pressed to his eye. But this time he wasn't fixing a stranger's watch. He was engraving a new one, a small silver locket watch. For Maya's 10th birthday, on the back he carefully etched the words, "Time is for what matters." Clara came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders and resting her chin on his head. She watched his steady hands, her heart swelling with a quiet joy that had become the new rhythm of her life. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "She'll love it." "It's not as beautiful as the life you've given us," he said, turning to kiss her softly. The shop was closed for the day. The students had gone home. The customers had departed. It was just the three of them in their quiet sanctuary. Maya came in a few minutes later, her cheeks flushed from playing outside. She looked at the watch in her father's hands, her eyes wide with wonder. "Is that for me?" Leo smiled and held it out to her. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She took it with a reverence that reminded him of himself all those years ago. Holding his father's watch, she opened it and read the inscription, her finger tracing the letters. "Time is for what matters," she said softly. Then she looked up at them, her eyes shining with a wisdom beyond her years. "Like us," she said, and wrapped her arms around both of them in a fierce hug. Leo and Clara held her tight. Their little family a perfect, intricate mechanism of love, and second chances. The clocks on the walls ticked in steady harmony, a chorus of heartbeats in the gilded hour, and as the sun set, casting a warm, golden glow over the three of them, Leo knew that he had done more than just pay the rent. He had built a life more valuable than any timepiece, a life measured not in the time he had lost, but in the love he had found. He had sold his father's watch to save his daughter, but in the end, he had gained a world he never knew he was missing, a world where he was not just a watchmaker, but a husband, a father, a man who had finally learned that the most precious thing you can give someone is your time, and the greatest gift you can receive is someone who is willing to give you theirs for the rest of your life.